Bible, Joel.
We're going to pick up the overview today with a look at the book of Joel. And Joel's one of the books one of the smaller the minor prophets that I have enjoyed over the years. It's really stuck with me. The word Joel itself means Yahweh is God. So it's a good name to have if you're going to be a prophet. And so Joel here, we don't know the exact date. The date of Joel's prophecy is disputed. Some think it was very early on, like in the 800s before Israel had fallen to Assyria. Some think it's after 586 when actually Judah had fallen to Babylon. So we don't really know. That if we look at that period once again, David was king. David was around the 1000 BC era, and so the kingdom of Israel lasted. It split after there was David, there was Solomon, there was Saul, David, Solomon, three kings that were part of a united kingdom. And then after Solomon, in his son's time, in Jeroboam, the nations divided, and there were 10 tribes that were the northern nation called Israel, and 2 that were the southern called Judah. And so this book, they don't really know exactly when the prophecies came, but it seems like it may have been very, very early while both of those nations were still in existence. And some of the reason for that is they say, well, there's no mention of Assyria or Babylon in this book, and those were the two enemies of that time, when those nations were falling. So some believe it's very early. Well, it begins with the description of a locust invasion. So we're going to look in chapter 1, verse 4. It says, what the gnawing locust has left, the swarming locust has eaten. What the swarming locust has left, the creeping locust has eaten. What the creeping locust has left, the stripping locust has eaten. And, that's a pretty bad thing. You get through one wave of this locust invasion, and you think, oh, that's bad, and then whatever was left, it gets eaten by the next wave, and whatever left, eaten by the next wave. So they're saying this is a time of incredible devastation. And in the encouragement through this, the message through it is in verse 5, awake, drunkards, and weep. Wail, all you wine drinkers, on account of the sweet wine that is cut off from your mouth. For a nation has invaded my land, mighty and without number. Its teeth are like the teeth of a lion, and it has the fangs of a lioness. So, this is turning from an invasion of a locust invasion to that's just a picture of a people group that's going to be raised up to come against the nation of Israel and in Judah. So in verse 14 of chapter 1, we see that the cry is given here by Joel. It says, to consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land to the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to the Lord. Alas for the day of the Lord is near, and will come as destruction from the Almighty. Here's the introduction here, and this time is the introduction in verse 15. Well, first, there's the cry, consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly, gather everyone together. There needs to be a time of repentance in seeking the Lord. And it says, but then it introduces this concept here, the day of the Lord is near. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. It's really important if you're going to understand the Bible. This is one of the main themes throughout the Old Testament, and it bleeds into the New Testament. If you want to understand what Paul is talking when he says, the day of the Lord will not come until, and he says that in 2 Thessalonians 2, you need to have an understanding of what the day of the Lord was all throughout the Bible and what's prophesied about it throughout the Old Testament. It's several times in these minor prophets we see this introduction or this mentioning of the day of the Lord. And in here we go on to chapter 2, and it begins to tell us a little more about it. First, it's the warning, blow a trumpet in Zion and sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the Lord tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming, surely it is near. So it's talking once again, it's saying the day of the Lord is coming. It has just likened it to this locust invasion that comes and just eats away everything and devastates everything. And then it describes this day of the Lord. Verse 2, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. As the dawn is spread over the mountains, so there is a great and mighty people. There has never been anything like it, nor will there be again after it to the years of many generations. It says, a fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame burns. The land is like the Garden of Eden before them, but a desolate wilderness behind them, and nothing at all escapes them. And so this whole locust invasion is a picture of of a people coming in to invade the land. And it says before them, it looks like the Garden of Eden. But wherever they've passed by, it looks like a desolate wilderness. And it concludes with the dismal idea that nothing escapes them. And so, a horrible picture of the day of the Lord. It's not a day of rejoicing. Here it's a day of judgment. It's a day when the Lord has his day against all of the wickedness that's been brought against him. And so in verse 12 of chapter 2 it says, "Yet even now declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting, weeping, and mourning." So he's giving, once again, a hope. "And rend your heart and not your garments." It's got to be an internal thing. He's not looking just you do motions on the outside. You know, we relate it sometimes to, well, I attended church, you know, and I gave tithes, I did this, I did that. But he's saying it needs to be something, rend your heart and not your garments. Do something internal, not just external. "Now return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness and relenting of evil, who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, even a grain offering and a libation for the Lord your God. Blow a trumpet in Zion, consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly." So here he's calling for repentance like so many of the prophets do. It seems like in this day there might have been more of a repentance. There's been in other times, because unless this was at the end of the reign of Judah, but you know, if this was early on, it looks like maybe there was a call to repentance and there was a heeding of it. We don't know exactly because of the timing of this. Verse 18, "Then the Lord will be zealous for his land, he will have pity on his people, and the Lord will answer and say to his people, Behold, I am coming to send you grain, new wine, and oil, and you will be satisfied and full with them, and I will never again make you a reproach among the nations." So he's talking about here of a promised time when they turn, he's going to come and really fulfill his promises to them. So in verse 23 of chapter 2, it says, "So rejoice, O sons of Zion, be glad in the Lord your God, for he has given you the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you the rain, the early and latter rain, as before," or some translations in 1 month. And what it's talking about there were rain in seasons. You know, early rain was the rain when after the planting, and the late rain was the rain just before the harvesting that put on that last bit of grain, you know, the thrust of growing there. And he's saying here, he says there's going to be a time when you can rejoice because the Lord is going to bring a vindication. He's going to pour out all this rain at one time, in a single month, or just in its timing to produce a great harvest. In this case, it would be a harvest of righteousness and fulfillment and restoration. And then he says in verse 24, "And the threshing floors will be full of grain, and the vats will overflow with the new wine and oil." I guess it could be fats. You eat enough vats and you'll get fats. But the vats will overflow with new wine and oil. And then verse 25 is the hope here. And then the rest of the scriptures in this passage refer to this hope. "Then I will make up to you for the years that the swarming locusts have eaten, the creeping locust, the stripping locust, and the gnawing locust, my great army which I sent among you." So he's talking about there will be a time of restoration from this great devastation. And we're getting to look at the key as to what that will be. But he says, first in verse 26, "And you shall have plenty to eat and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. Then my people will never be put to shame." Verse 27, "Thus you will know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and there is no other, and my people will never be put to shame." So he's talking about a great time of restoration, when instead of the locusts eating everything, there's going to be plenty that's going to be harvested. There's going to be plenty that's going to be eaten. People are going to be rejoicing because they have plenty. This talks about a real time of fulfillment that the Lord is bringing about. Most of these passages refer to the very end of the age and what God's going to do. And as we look into the next part, we'll see that how this is related to an outpouring of the Spirit that's going to be a restoration. And what happens is not only a restoration to Israel, but a restoration and a blessing to all the nations.